state of karidaikos, the assumption is that a person lacks capacity. Therefore, the second statement is made. So we'll say, so therefore, in this case over here, he said, write a get for my wife while he was of sound mind, and then he canceled the directive while in the state of karidaikos. So the Gemara says that second statement issued during the state of karidaikos is irrelevant. Amru Shem Lakish says, Lakish said, Kosvin v'nosin get la'akos. So we'll say, now here's the interesting shaila. So the shaila comes like this. We'll say, let's play this out. So Ruvain says to a group of people, write a get for my wife. Write a get for my wife. Okay, they hear it. After they receive the directive, he contracts karidaikos. Okay? And now we'll say, in the state of karidaikos, he says, don't write the get. So the Gemara says, what's the status of his statement? What's the status of the get? What's the status of the get? It's on, right? It's on. Write the get. We'll say, the shaila is now, when should we write the get? So Amr Shimon Lakish says, Kosim v'nosin get la'alter. We continue. In other words, we'll say, we literally write and deliver the get immediately. Now, we'll say, what Rish Lakish is saying is like this. Even though right now, as we're writing the get, what is Ruvain the husband doing? What is Ruvain the husband doing? What is he doing? What is he doing? He's saying, don't write it, don't write it, don't write it. Right? He's suffering from karidaikos, telling us not to write the get. Rish Lakish says, we continue the process, right? We continue writing the get because, again, whatever he says during karidaikos is absolutely and wholly irrelevant. Rabbi Yochanan says, no. In kosin ella k'sheyishtafa. Rabbi Yochanan says, listen, we're not negating the get, but we're also going to wait to write it until he becomes healthy again. In other words, what we do, Rabbi say, is we pause the process until Ruvain is healthy. That's what we're going to do. We're going to pause until Ruvain is healthy. So my time of the Reish Lakish. So I will say, so this is the fundamental machlokes. So my time of the Reish Lakish. What's Reish Lakish's logic? Diktani ein bidvar machronim klum. So I will say, Reish Lakish says, look, once you say in the Mishnah that whatever he says during karidaikos is irrelevant, then I will say, then what should we do? Continue the process. As Reish Lakish says, there's no reason to pause. Meaning, at the end of the day, halacha l'maisa, whatever he says during karidaikos is absolutely wholly irrelevant, and therefore halacha l'maisa, continue on. Rabbi Yochanan amar lecha ein b'dvar v'amachronim klum d'lechi misso lo tzarich lemehadar amluchei bei. Rabbi Yochanan says, when we say that what he says during karidaikos is irrelevant, what that means, I will say, is when he is healed, there is no reason to go ahead and ask him again, do you still want to give the get? Right? But however, but at the end of the day, we don't write it until he's healed. So I will say, so here's what's interesting. So really, it's fascinating. So according to Reish Lakish, Ruvain, our husband, is suffering from karidaikos, is saying, don't write the get, don't write the get, don't write the get. Reish Lakish says, continue on with the process. Since his words are irrelevant, there is no reason to pause the process, keep going. Rabbi Yochanan says, when we say that his words uttered during karidaikos don't have an effect, that means once he's healed, we don't have to ask him again, do you still want us to continue? But Lamaisa, you have to pause the process until he's of sound mind. So, what are they arguing about? Reish Lakish mandame liyashen. So I will say, Reish Lakish says a guy suffering from karidaikos is the same thing as a person who's sleeping. So imagine the following situation. Imagine Ruvain says to two people, write a get for my wife, and then he goes to sleep. The Reish Lakish says, do you have to wait until he wakes up in order to write the get? Of course not. What do you do? Continue on. So karidaikos is just like someone who's sleeping. Rabbi Yochanan says, no. Karidaikos is not like sleeping. Karidaikos is like a shota. And I will say, same thing by a shota. By a shota, we would say, let's wait until he's of sound mind before we go ahead and we give the get. Rabbi Yochanan, why does Rabbi Yochanan compare karidaikos to sleeping? So Yashin l'mechusar maisa. Because we will say sleeping is not missing a maisa. In other words, we will say for karidaikos, we need a process in order to heal him. Yashin, there's no process. To which the Gemara says, Reish Lakish, why doesn't Reish Lakish compare karidaikos to a shota? So here's the difference. Shota lo samya biyadon. Ultimately, we will say by a shota, there's no cure for being a shota. I will say many of us recognize this from our encounters throughout the day, right? Right, there is no cure for foolishness, right? No cure for foolishness. There's no cure for shtos. But hi, samya biadan. But ultimately, and I will say for karidaikos, remember again, there is a remedy. I will say, what's the remedy for karidaikos? Bisra sumka agmuri v'chamra marka. I will say, remember again, the cure for karidaikos, the best Talmudic cure, fatty meat roasted over coals with undiluted wine. But did Rabbi Yochanan actually say this? Right? Did Rabbi Yochanan actually take this position? So the Gemara says, after all, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Shachat bo shnayim o rov shnayim. But say, listen to this. If a man chas v'shalom had a situation where the two simon, I will say his esophagus and windpipe were both cut, were both fully cut, or the majority of them were cut, v'amar kisvu get leishti, and such a person was able to say, write a get for my wife. Hare elu yichtavu v'yitnu. We'll say the halacha is you write it and you give it. You write it and you give it. The Tanya, and we'll say we learned. So we'll say now what's fascinating about that case. What's fascinating about that case is okay. For Tanya we learned Ra'u Maguyad. We'll say if a person was literally cut up into pieces, Ot Salav Alatzliva, or hanging on the gallows, the Ramaz, and he motioned, and Va'amar Kisvu get leishti, and he said, write a get from my wife. Hare elu yichtavu v'yitnu. Ultimately, again, you have to go ahead and you give a get, right? You write it and you give the get. Shabbos say. So now remember again, what's interesting over here is as follows. These are cases where a person is actively dying. And yet the halacha is, if they say give a get, ultimately again, we have them give a get. Now we'll say, so the reason why the Gemara is asking on Rabbi Yochanan is, Rabbi Yochanan was the one who said that when a person is not in a sound mental state, we pause the process. I will say, in these situations where people are dying, one can make the argument that perhaps they're not in a sound mental state. Yet, halacha l'maaseh, Rabbi Yochanan is on record as saying, give the get. So I will say, so it seems to be a kasha. Hachi hashta hasam daitet selusahi. But in these cases, Rabbi Yochanan will say, these people have absolutely solid intent. Right? The issue over here is not about intent. The intent, right? Their das is intact. I will say, what's not intact? Their physicality. Right? They're in a weakened state. But Lamai said their das is absolutely intact. Hacha daita shegishtihi. Both say in the case of the karidaikos, literally again their das is compromised. So we'll say it's actually interesting. So Yochanan will say in the cases where the guy is dying, just because the guy is dying, that doesn't mean his das is not solid. So we assume the das is solid, but lamaisa again is the physicality that is waning, as opposed to the karidaikos case, the das is not intact. We'll say, did Shmuel actually say this? The Shmuel, right? Rashi says, Umiyamar Shmuel, Shachap Oshnaim Kosim get leishto, Alma get mechaimu. Now we'll say, so fine. So now we'll say, now the Gemara is totally switching gears. What we're switching gears, we'll say, is this case of the guy who has his windpipe and his esophagus cut, right? So he's actively dying, and you don't recover from that, we'll say. So now Shmuel's on record as saying, you could write a get for such an individual, who tells us right yet, so the Shmuel actually say this. So I will say, so the Gemara says, the Shmuel actually says, so I will say, by the way, I'll just pause just a second. What about so we're veering off now the Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So I will say, so remember again, going back for just a second, and here's what everybody agrees with. If the husband is of sound mind and he says, Kisu get lishti, right again, give it to my wife. And then what happens? He's seized by karidaikos. And he says, don't write the get. Everyone agrees that what? That halacha l'maisa, we ignore the second statement and we go forward with the get. The shaila is, do we go forward with the get now, even while he's in this state of karidaikos, saying don't write the get, or do we wait? Machlokes Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish says continue on. Rabbi Yochanan says pause. So we'll say the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yochanan. That as much as that which he says during karidaikos, we don't listen to. However, halacha l'maaseh, we will pause the process until husband recovers from his karidaikos and then continue on in the get. And when he recovers, we don't have to go back and say, Pave, do you still want us to do the get? We'll do the get, but but Allah will wait until he recovers from his cardiac. I suppose we'll stop over for today. We'll pick up with the case again tomorrow of Shacha Boshtayim or Roshtayim. Oseh Shkoyach. So perfect.